In 1918, an ambitious railroad entrepreneur believed he had finally found the perfect place to build America's next great city. Investors poured in money, workers rushed to the remote Arizona desert, and newspapers confidently predicted a brilliant future. But within only a few years, the town stood empty beneath the blazing sun. The buildings remained, but the people were gone. Today, its abandoned streets still whisper a lesson history has repeated for generations. People plan the future with certainty, but the future has plans of its own. In the spring of 1918, the American Southwest was experiencing rapid growth. Railroads connected distant territories, mining companies expanded across the deserts, and entrepreneurs searched constantly for the next booming settlement. One such visionary was 36-year-old Edward Lawson, a respected railway engineer from St. Louis. Edward had spent nearly 15 years designing rail connections across the western United States. He understood transportation, commerce, and city planning better than most businessmen of his time. When he discovered a remote stretch of land in Arizona that sat between several expanding railway routes, he became convinced it would become one of America's greatest commercial centers. He called the project New Horizon. Investors loved the idea. Construction began almost immediately. Wooden homes appeared across the dusty landscape. A hotel welcomed travelers. A train depot, general store, church, schoolhouse, and bank quickly followed. Newspapers praised New Horizon as the city of tomorrow. Families left established towns hoping for better opportunities. Merchants opened businesses. Teachers accepted positions. Children played along newly built streets. Everything suggested success. Edward walked proudly through the growing town almost every evening. This, he often told visitors, is where the future begins. But history rarely follows human expectations. Late in 1919, engineers working for another railway company announced plans for a new rail connection that completely bypassed New Horizon. At first, few people worried. Edward assured investors that alternative routes would eventually reach the town. "They'll never ignore this location," he insisted confidently. Construction continued. New buildings appeared. Optimism remained strong. But throughout 1920, warning signs quietly emerged. Freight shipments decreased. Businesses earned less money. Several merchants quietly moved elsewhere. The once busy train depot became noticeably quieter. Still, Edward refused to believe the project could fail. He borrowed additional money, expanded construction, promised everyone that prosperity was only months away. Many trusted him. After all, he had built his reputation on careful planning. Then came the drought. For nearly 2 years, rainfall remained far below normal. Wells produced less water. Farming became almost impossible. Supply costs increased dramatically. Families found daily life increasingly difficult. At the same time, neighboring towns connected directly to the new railway expanded rapidly, attracting businesses that might otherwise have chosen New Horizon. Opportunity quietly moved elsewhere. By 1922, reality could no longer be ignored. The hotel closed, the bank relocated, teachers left after the school shut its doors. Entire families packed their belongings on wagons and departed before sunrise. Within months, dozens of homes stood empty. Dust slowly covered streets that had once echoed with children's laughter. Edward remained behind. Every morning he walked through silent neighborhoods, unable to understand how carefully planned dreams had disappeared so quickly. One evening he entered the abandoned railway station. Old timetables still hung on the walls. Empty benches gathered dust. A forgotten suitcase remained in one corner, never claimed. For several minutes he stood completely still. Everything he had worked for remained physically present. The buildings, the roads, the station, the church, yet without people, none of it mattered. Weeks later, an elderly traveler stopped briefly while crossing the desert. Looking around the deserted town, he quietly asked Edward, "Did something terrible happen here?" Edward looked across the empty streets before answering. "No." The traveler seemed surprised. "Then why did everyone leave?" Edward remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he replied, "Because we believed tomorrow would certainly arrive exactly the way we imagined." The old man nodded thoughtfully. Tomorrow never makes promises. Those words stayed with Edward for the rest of his life. Eventually, he left New Horizon as well. The desert slowly reclaimed the settlement. Wooden buildings weathered beneath the Arizona sun. Windows shattered, roofs collapsed, sand covered sidewalks. Decades later, historians classified New Horizon as another forgotten ghost town of the American West. Visitors who discovered its abandoned remains often assumed economic failure alone explained its disappearance. But local historians believe the story represented something much deeper. The town had not simply been abandoned because business failed. It became abandoned because human certainty collided with life's uncertainty. Edward had prepared carefully. He worked honestly. He planned responsibly. Yet there remained forces beyond any person's control. changing railroads, changing weather, changing economies, changing history. As years passed, the abandoned streets became a quiet reminder that the future has never belonged entirely to human planning. People still arrive at forgotten places across America asking the same question: what happened here? Sometimes the answer is not disaster, not war, not crime, simply uncertainty, because history repeatedly teaches one uncomfortable truth. People imagine one future, life quietly creates another. That is why abandoned towns continue fascinating us today. They remind us that success deserves effort, dreams deserve planning, and ambition deserves courage. But certainty belongs to no one. Edward Lawson believed he was building America's future. Instead, he unknowingly built one of its forgotten mysteries. And more than a century later, beneath the silent Arizona sky, the empty streets continue teaching the same lesson. People plan one future, but time always has the final decision.